Hey guys, tonight we slip into the smoke-dark world of Viking sleep. Picture yourself lying on a coarse, uneven wooden platform, the surface hardened from years of wear, tucked snugly inside a crowded longhouse somewhere deep in the cold breath of 9th century Scandinavia. Outside, the wind claws at the structure with the persistence of some ancient spirit from the sea, rattling the thatched roof above you with long, sighing groans. It sounds as if the house is exhaling slowly, uneasy in its slumber. Before we get too settled in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find value in what I do here. It keeps this sleepy little project going. And while you're here, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see where in the world we're falling asleep together tonight. Now, dim the lights in your room. Let the world fade to shadows. Maybe turn on a fan or find a soft ambient noise to hum in the background. We're about to slip quietly into the rhythm of this ancient night. Beneath your stiff, travel-worn body is a thin pad of bedding, roughly sewn from whatever was available, perhaps a sack stuffed with straw, moss, or dry grass pulled from the hills. You shift slightly, and something brittle crunches beneath you. A dried twig? A bone splinter? Hopefully not a beetle, although in this world that would not be unusual. The cold seeps in, despite the timber walls that have been patched and repatched with whatever materials could be gathered from the forest and the fields. It nips at your skin, curls into the spaces between your joints, and settles there like an unwelcome guest. But there is warmth here too, not from hearths or blankets alone, but from the press of human bodies on either side. You're wedged tightly between your cousin, whose arm keeps slipping over yours as he dreams, and a goat. A real, living goat, who occasionally shifts its hooves in its sleep and lets out a puff of hot breath across your ribs. Its shaggy coat stinks faintly of dung and hay, but it's warm. You decide not to move. After all, this is what bedtime looks like here. This is Viking-style rest. Forget the idea of a private bedroom. That concept doesn't exist in this world. Your bed, if it can be called that, is more accurately a low wooden bench built along the wall, perhaps no wider than your shoulders and barely long enough for your legs. These benches are shared with family members, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes more, depending on how desperate the cold is that night. If you're fortunate, you've got a reindeer pelt or a roughly woven wool blanket thrown across your back to trap in what heat your body can generate. More often than not, you're tangled in those scratchy covers alongside multiple others, with little concern for modesty or personal space. If one of them snores, you endure it. If someone thrashes in their sleep and elbows you in the chest, you consider it a crude kind of massage. Vikings didn't waste time complaining about discomfort. They just adapted to it. You exhale slowly, and a puff of white condensation floats into the chill air before dissipating. Nestled deeper into the folds of your furs, you listen. The longhouse is dim now. Only a faint orange glow flickers from the hearth at the center of the space, where embers still smolder under a layer of ash. Near your feet, a dog is curled in a tight ball. You recognize him from earlier this morning, the same scruffy mutt who chased the chickens into the cookpot, disrupting breakfast with a cacophony of feathers and squawks. Now he's still, gently breathing, a warm presence beside your toes. You don't complain. His body adds another pocket of heat to the frigid space. Everyone sleeps in this hall, men, women, children, farmhands, aging grandparents, and even the occasional wandering traveler, if the family is feeling generous and there's floor space to spare. The longhouse isn't just a home, it's a survival chamber. During the long, brutal Scandinavian winters, conserving warmth is more than comfort. It is a matter of survival. The architecture reflects this need. The buildings are long and narrow with low ceilings to trap heat. Turf and straw are packed into every crevice of the roof and walls, turning the house into a sort of earthen thermos. It may not look like much from the outside, but within, the heat of dozens of bodies and a steadily burning fire holds the cold at bay. Think of it as a very primitive version of central heating, just with far more feet near your face and far less regard for hygiene. In wealthier homes, those belonging to the jarls and chieftains, the arrangements are a little more refined. Sometimes they have what were known as bed closets, small, semi-enclosed sleeping alcoves carved from timber and lined with tapestries or thick curtains. These offered some illusion of privacy and helped block the worst of the drafts. The walls were often decorated with symbols or family markings, not just for decoration but to mark territory in the otherwise shared household. Still, even these private cubbies weren't truly soundproof. At any moment, the tranquility could be shattered by the cries of a baby, the groan of an old man's aching joints, or the unmistakable sound of someone stepping on a rake just outside the longhouse door. Scholars continue to debate how much romantic privacy Viking couples were actually granted. Some believe that married pairs were allowed to claim these cozy nooks, offering at least a little space for intimacy and rest. Others suggest that beds weren't strictly assigned. During the coldest months, when the priority was simply to survive until dawn, the lines between formality and necessity blurred. Bodies clustered wherever they could fit, regardless of relationship or arrangement. The goal was heat. Everything else was secondary. One truth that emerges across most historical accounts is that the Norse valued warmth and practicality above personal boundaries. There was no shame in being close. There was no embarrassment in sharing space. Life demanded it. In the far north, with the howling winds and treacherous frost always waiting outside, there was no luxury in isolation. There was only the question of how to endure the night. The furs covering you are thick and heavy. They smell of lanolin and old wood smoke. Reindeer hides, sheepskins, perhaps even the prized pelt of a bear, if your family was brave or wealthy enough to acquire one, are layered over your shoulders and chest. These hides aren't soft in the way we think of modern luxury. They're stiff, pungent, often riddled with the lingering presence of fleas or burrs. But they serve their purpose. They keep your blood warm. They keep your fingers from stiffening. In a world where a night below freezing could mean frostbite or worse, the weight of that stinking, itchy fur is a small price to pay, and somehow, in the middle of all this discomfort, there is a kind of comfort. The air smells of dried fish, peat smoke, and boiled roots. The silence is not truly silent, but full of gentle, familiar sounds, the rhythm of breathing from those around you, the tiny crackles of wood turning to ember in the hearth, the muttered words of someone dreaming in Old Norse. Maybe it's your uncle. Maybe it's your sister. Maybe it's someone else entirely. It hardly matters. Their voice becomes part of the rhythm of the house. You stretch your legs slowly, cautiously, trying not to nudge the toddler sleeping sideways at your feet. He's rolled halfway off the bench and is now wedged between your ankles like a sack of potatoes. You leave him be. The longhouse creaks again, its old bones shifting in the cold like a wooden ship at sea. Outside, the wind moves through the pine trees with a sound like distant waves, brushing the turf roof in long, sighing strokes. It almost sounds like a lullaby, slow and deep, as if sung by something ancient and gentle. There is no clock to govern bedtime. No alarm to jolt you awake. The sun is the only master here. In winter, darkness reigns for as many as 20 hours a day. The people sleep early, wake late, and use the long, inky hours of night for quiet work, repairing tools, spinning wool, telling stories, whispering prayers, and settling minor disagreements with hushed tones and tired eyes, and sleep itself, for the Vikings, often came in segments. You do not simply fall asleep and wake up 8 hours later. Instead, many followed a pattern now called segmented sleep. The night begins with first sleep, a period of deep, early rest. After a few hours, you stir. You find yourself awake, not fully, but gently, quietly. The hearth is still glowing. Others might be awake too. During this time, People whisper, pray, share warmth with a partner, stoke the fire, or swap ghost stories. Some even sneak a bite to eat, if food is near. Others sit in silence, listening, wondering if that creak on the rafters is the wind, or perhaps the spirit of Great Aunt Inga looking for her necklace again. Then comes second sleep. You close your eyes once more and fall into a lighter, dreamier state of rest until dawn. Today's scientists suggest this rhythm is deeply ingrained in our biology, a natural response to long winter nights. So next time you wake at 3 a.m. and wonder why you feel oddly alert, take heart. You're not broken. You're sleeping like a Viking. Of course, the concept of sleep hygiene didn't exist here. The air inside the longhouse is thick with smoke from the hearth, which has no chimney. A small hole in the roof lets some of it escape, but most of it lingers, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your throat. The scent is sharp and earthy. It stings the eyes and sometimes drives away insects. It also makes you cough. Still, you do your best to sleep. The floor groans softly. Someone nearby whispers something indistinct. The goat beside you snorts in its sleep. You pull the furs tighter, burrowing your face into the wool blanket. It's scratchy, but it smells like home. Someone nearby begins to snore. It's the kind of snore that sounds like a blacksmith's bellows struggling to sing. You sigh, resigned. You shift your body, tuck your hands beneath the covers, and prepare yourself for what is likely to be the most uncomfortable, least restful, most strangely comforting night's sleep you've ever had. The fire hasn't died completely. It crackles softly at the center of the longhouse, fed every so often by whoever wakes up mid-dream and stumbles barefoot across the cold floor to toss on another log. You blink awake sometime during your first or second sleep, it's hard to tell. What you do notice is that your face feels warm from the fire's glow, but your back is freezing. Typical Viking bedtime balance. One cheek toasty, the other in Nibelheim. You're sleeping maybe 10 feet away from the hearth, the central heart of the home, and every Viking longhouse is built around one. This isn't a fireplace like you might imagine. It's a long, open trench of flame and ember, running down the middle of the house. No chimney. No glass screen. Just fire and smoke swirling upward into the darkness, escaping slowly through the roof hole and cracks in the beams, and it's always smoldering. Always. Even when the household sleeps, that fire stays lit. Someone's job is to poke it now and then. Keep it breathing. Not just for warmth, though without it, you'd shiver yourself awake every 20 minutes, but also for protection. That fire repels hungry animals and lingering spirits. Or so the elders say. The light it gives off flickers across faces, shadows dancing across rough-hewn walls and hanging herbs. It's not enough to fully illuminate the space, but it offers comfort. Security. A gentle throb of life in the darkness. You watch it for a while, hypnotized, before dozing again. Sleeping beside fire sounds romantic, but in Viking times, it's also vaguely hazardous. One clumsy roll in the wrong direction and your fur blanket becomes kindling. And the smoke. Thick. Acrid. It doesn't rise neatly through the smoke hole as you'd hope, it lingers in the rafters, swirls around the space like a ghost unsure of where to go. Your lungs get used to it eventually. Or they don't. Historians still debate whether these smoky interiors caused long-term respiratory issues among the Norse. There's no clear medical evidence from skeletons, but old saga descriptions hint at constant coughing and watery eyes. Charming, right? Sometimes, the fire's glow is the only reason you know when it's time to sleep at all. In the endless summers, the sun barely sets, so families rely on routine. When the fire dims, so do the eyelids. The fire becomes your clock. When it dies, you sleep. When it flares, you wake, and then there's fire etiquette. In some households, placing your feet too close to the hearth was a minor offense, seen as greedy or disrespectful. Children were taught not to hog the warmth. It had to be shared evenly, like everything else in this communal life. You can't be selfish in a room with 30 freezing relatives, another charming side effect. Your hair and clothes constantly smell like burnt birch and stale mutton grease. But so does everyone else, so nobody really notices. Sleep positions aren't exactly comfy. There are no pillows, unless you count a rolled-up tunic or sack of straw. Some Vikings used wooden headrests shaped like mini benches, the kind that offer exactly zero neck support. Others simply curled up near the fire in a fetal position, turning from time to time to roast both sides evenly. You lie on your side now, staring into the glowing coals. As a familiar scratching begins from the corner. A rat? A squirrel? No, probably a family dog pawing at something in its sleep. You pray it's not your boots. You try to relax again. The fire crackles in rhythmic bursts. It's like a heartbeat, echoing in the silence. Soft murmurs float through the darkness, someone whispering a prayer to Frigg, goddess of the hearth. It's both a spiritual and practical gesture. Frigg was often invoked to keep homes safe, children healthy, and fires warm. A proper Viking bedtime trifecta. What's strange is how comfort and danger blend so casually here. You're lulled by the fire even as it poses a risk. You sleep in the glow of life, knowing full well it could bite you if you get too close. That's the Viking way. Balance on a blade. Warmth with risk. Sleep with one eye open. You're reminded of a tale your grandmother once told, of a man who dreamed so deeply beside his heart that he didn't notice a fox creeping into the longhouse. The beast stole half a smoked salmon and chewed through someone's sandal before vanishing again. That's the kind of bedtime story Vikings shared. Real enough to make you peek under the fur at every creak in the floor. And what about the smoke spirits? Yes. Those. Folklore warned of beings who lived in the rafters, hiding in the soot, creeping down at night to whisper nonsense into your ear. You were supposed to keep a sprig of juniper near the fire to ward them off. You check now. No juniper. Just some drying onions. Hopefully the spirits don't mind, even the firewood itself matters. Certain woods were believed to carry luck, or curses. Ash and birch were common, but never yew. Burning yew was said to attract Hell's attention, the goddess of the underworld. If someone in your house did it, you'd side-eye them for a week. Despite the eerie bits, the hearth is your anchor. It's the core of domestic life, used for cooking, storytelling, warming water, drying clothes, heating beds. If you're sick, you sleep closest to the hearth, wrapped in every available blanket. If you're in trouble with your parents, you sleep farthest from it, near the coldest wall. It's social regulation by temperature, and when it's time to rise again, whether for the second half of the night or for the day, you stretch stiffly and eye the fire. Still glowing. Still alive. Just like you. The first thing you hear isn't a person, it's a grunt. A wet, sighing grunt, low and close. You open one eye, and there it is. A cow. Breathing heavily into the straw beside your head. Its flank rises and falls with slow, deliberate rhythm, steam puffing from its nostrils in the cold. You blink again, registering the unmistakable scent of livestock. Yes, you're definitely still in the Viking longhouse. And yes, the cow is very much sharing your bedroom, because in the colder months, it's not just your human family sleeping under the same roof. The animals come inside too. Cows, goats, sheep, sometimes even chickens if they're valued enough to protect from the elements or prowling foxes. The longhouse is their shelter as much as it is yours. No, you don't get your own wing. The animals typically occupy one end of the structure, sometimes separated by a low wall or wooden rail. But boundaries are flexible. If a cow decides it likes your bedding better, it might step over the line, literally, and plop down nearby. The hay-stuffed partition creaks in protest as another sheep jostles through. Why this strange arrangement? Simple. Warmth. Body heat. Livestock are not only walking sources of milk, meat, and manure, they're also surprisingly efficient space heaters. A full-grown cow radiates about the same heat as a small bonfire. That's no small comfort when the frost starts creeping into the floorboards. You pull the furs higher over your nose and try to ignore the moist chewing sounds. Someone mutters in sleep on your other side, rolling away from the snuffling goat. A child somewhere giggles. You hope it's because of a dream and not because they're about to stick something in the fire again. Historians still debate how permanent this indoor livestock situation was. Some argue it was only during deep winter or in particularly remote households. Others believe it was more widespread, practical, if unsanitary. Archaeological digs in Norse farmsteads have turned up clear evidence of barn-like features within longhouses, sloped floors for waste drainage, hay mounds, and feeding troughs integrated right into the living space, so yes, that crunch under your foot might not be straw. You shift a little to check and immediately regret it, but let's not romanticize it too much. Sleeping beside animals had downsides. The smell, for one. The ever-present risk of fleas or lice, especially in warmer seasons. The danger of being accidentally stepped on by a cow with poor nighttime navigation skills. You learn to keep your boots close and your nose turned away from the goat pen. Still, for Vikings, animals weren't just resources. They were part of the household rhythm. Children often named the family cow, and it wasn't unusual for someone to form an attachment to a sheep that had wintered beside them for months. You might even whisper your dreams to the ox before sleep, just to get them off your chest, and it wasn't just for warmth. Livestock inside meant less risk of theft. Cattle raids were a real threat, especially in poorer or more isolated settlements. Bringing animals inside was as much about security as it was about comfort. If someone broke into the longhouse, the cow would probably moo before you could even sit up. You try to shift your legs into a more comfortable position, but the dog has curled itself directly onto your ankles. A goat sneezes. A chicken clucks once, sleepily. You make a mental note to reinforce the animal rail tomorrow, maybe add an extra log to keep the larger ones from drifting into your sleep zone. The mingling of human and animal rhythms creates a strange harmony. The entire room breathes together. You listen for the syncopation, the rise and fall of human sighs, the soft shuffle of hooves, the crackling of the fire, the occasional snort. It's weirdly soothing, like a pastoral white noise machine. In some stories, you remember, this setup even bleeds into Norse mythology. The great cow Audhumla, who licked the primordial ice and birthed the first gods, was said to be the source of life itself. Sleeping beside cows wasn't just practical, it was rooted in creation. Who knew bedtime could be so deeply metaphysical, but sometimes, the harmony breaks. One of the sheep begins to bleat in its sleep. Loudly. You groan. It continues. Another one joins in, out of solidarity or confusion. Eventually, someone throws a boot in their direction. It hits the wall. The sheep quiets. Sort of, and still, you lie there, trying to reclaim whatever dream you were halfway through before being pulled back by animal snores. It's never quite peaceful, but it's never truly chaotic either. Just messy, noisy, lived-in life. You try to find a comfortable spot again. It's not easy with limited space and 1 foot already numb from dog compression. But somehow, despite it all, your eyes drift shut again. The cow snorts one last time. The fire pops. The world narrows into darkness, warmth, and the strange comfort of creatures breathing beside you. The air is colder now. It settles into your nostrils like a slow trickle of snow, sharp and dry. You tug the wool blanket up tighter, but the fibers scratch your chin with that familiar itchy defiance. This isn't a soft, luxurious modern fleece. It's thick, coarse, and hand-woven, probably from a sheep you met last summer. There's a whiff of lanolin, a hint of campfire, and something else. Old cabbage. You try not to think about it. Nightwear in Viking culture isn't what you'd call curated. No cotton pajamas, no silk robes, no matching sets. In fact, the idea of night clothes was loosely defined. People often slept in what they wore during the day, or in whatever kept them warm enough not to wake up with frost in their eyebrows. Some chose to strip down completely, especially during warmer months. Others kept on their tunics and breeches, worn and reworn until they could practically stand up on their own. Wool was the fabric of choice. Scratchy, heavy, and naturally water-resistant, it was the textile that got the job done, even if it left you with a few permanent thigh abrasions. You shift again, the blanket pulling away just enough to expose your shoulder to the air. Cold zings down your spine. You mutter something in Old Norse that loosely translates to "Why does my blanket hate me?" and yank it back. There's no formal bedtime ritual here. No brushing teeth. No soothing face cream. At best, you might splash your face with cold water from a wooden bucket if it hasn't frozen over. The Vikings weren't known for spa nights. Personal hygiene was limited to what was necessary, or achievable with a horn comb and a vague sense of urgency. And yet, they weren't entirely without standards. Some households passed down thick linen shifts meant specifically for nighttime wear, especially among wealthier families. They were rare, prized, and often embroidered with protective runes stitched near the collar. These garments weren't just about comfort, they were talismans against bad dreams, illness, or whatever shadowy figures haunted the dark corners of the longhouse. Historians still argue whether these shifts were common among average Norse folk or reserved only for the elite. The sagas mention sleeping tunics in a few passages, but archaeological evidence is thin. Most commoners likely made do with what they had, reusing an old wool shirt. Wrapping up in cloaks, or just embracing the cold with Viking stubbornness. And here's something quirky, some warriors believed that sleeping completely naked helped toughen the spirit. Others saw it as inviting unnecessary trouble. After all, if someone broke in during the night, you'd have to choose between grabbing your sword or your dignity first. Spoiler, most chose the sword. You glance down at yourself now. Your tunic is twisted and bunched, half your legs sticking out from under the furs like a forgotten drumstick. One arm's inside the blanket, the other wrapped in the dog's tail. You consider fixing it. But it feels like too much effort. Typical Viking move, for children. Nightwear was even less of a priority. They often slept in whatever they wore until it quite literally fell apart. In some winters, they'd be bundled so tightly in spare scraps of cloth and furs that they could barely roll over. Parents wrapped them up like root vegetables and tucked them between adults for warmth. Not exactly Montessori approved, but effective. And shoes. Always off. Boots came off at the door, assuming you had boots, and were set near the fire to dry. Some Vikings had sleeping slippers, soft leather foot wraps for extra warmth. Others just shoved their feet into the armpits of whoever was closest. A real bonding experience. Let's not forget headgear. While most didn't wear anything on their heads at night, some people, especially the elderly, used wool caps or hoods to keep the heat in. A sort of proto-beanie, if you will. Vikings understood that most body heat escaped through the head. So if you see grandma bundled up like a woolen onion while the kids snore half-naked, now you know why, and when someone did put effort into their sleep attire, it often reflected deeper beliefs. Clothes weren't just fabric. They were protection. Some warriors wore special linen wraps with symbols of Thor or Odin inked into the hems. Others tied small pouches of herbs to their belts to chase away nightmares. One particularly strange belief: sleeping with your clothes inside out could confuse malevolent spirits. Apparently, ghosts weren't great at fashion. You'd think a restless wraith could tell the back from the front of a shirt, but no. This tiny twist in wardrobe logic was enough to foil their nightly mischief. Or so they hoped. You lie there now, wondering if you should try it. Flip your tunic inside out, just in case. But then you remember how cold it is, and how long it takes to wrestle with Viking clothing in the dark. You sigh. Let the ghosts do their worst. Still, there's a quiet comfort to the awkward layers. The scratchy wool, the communal warmth. You shift again, pulling the blanket over your nose. The fire sputters gently. Someone mumbles. A goat shuffles closer, and somehow, wrapped in fabric that feels like it's made from tree bark and regret, you fall asleep again, warrior, dreamer, blanket thief. You awaken to darkness, and not just the kind that comes from nightfall. This is the inky, muffled sort of blackness that makes sound feel heavier, makes every breath louder. It's the middle space. The strange valley between first sleep and second sleep. And you're awake, staring into the void, your mind oddly alert. No one talks about this anymore, but Vikings, like many pre-industrial people, didn't sleep in one neat stretch. They dozed for a few hours after sundown, then woke naturally, spent an hour or two milling about in near silence, and eventually drifted back into a second, deeper slumber. Historians still debate whether this segmented sleep was by choice or simply a reaction to the long, uneven Scandinavian nights. But one thing's clear, this mid-sleep moment was deeply embedded in daily life. Some used it for prayer, others for sex, some for tending the fire or feeding an infant. You're lying still, wondering what that creak near the door was. A log settling. Or something more. You sit up slowly. A few other bodies stir nearby, someone's already feeding the fire, their silhouette glowing faintly orange. The room smells of smoke and old wood and a faint tang of dried fish. You suddenly remember the hunk of smoked herring you tucked under your blanket last night. You unwrap it now and take a slow bite. Cold. Chewy. Somehow. Perfect. A classic midnight snack. This wasn't unusual. Between sleeps, it was common for people to nibble leftover bread or dried meats, especially in winter when dinners were smaller. A little bit of nourishment helped stave off the chill and lull the body into rest again. One saga even mentions a man waking up during first sleep to chew seal fat and whisper secrets. Talk about multitasking, and speaking of whispering, this was also the hour of spirits. Many believed the veil between worlds thinned in the dead of night. That's why, even now, you glance toward the far corner of the room, where the shadows pool thicker. You think of Draugr, restless Viking undead, who were said to rise at this hour, stalking the halls of those who wronged them in life, just superstition. Probably. Still, you tuck the remaining herring under your blanket for safekeeping. Just in case, this between time wasn't just practical, it had a kind of intimacy. People spoke softly, shared murmured dreams, exchanged thoughts too private for daytime noise. Couples might make love, children might ask odd, sleepy questions, and old women might whisper charms against trolls, just for good measure. You hear one now. A soft chant, half song, half spell. An old woman near the wall reciting a verse to Frigg for peaceful dreams. Her voice is so soft you can't make out the words. But the rhythm lulls you. She's done this every night since you can remember. You'd miss it if she stopped. Viking homes weren't silent in sleep, they breathed. Whispered. Settled. Between these two sleeps, the longhouse became something else. Not fully asleep. Not fully awake. Somewhere between the waking world and whatever dreams waited in the second stretch, some people used this time to record dreams or seek meaning from them. Seers and vulvas, female shamans, sometimes claimed that visions seen between first and second sleep carried deeper truth. Odin himself, they said, watched mortals during this time, listening for secrets uttered in half-sleep. You hope he wasn't listening when you mumbled about the goat again. One particularly quirky belief held that if you heard someone calling your name during this hour, but no one was there, you had only a few days to live. The solution? Sit up. Spit 3 times. And loudly declare you weren't interested in dying just yet. Just to clarify, in case the afterlife was eavesdropping. Of course, not everyone feared this hour. Some embraced it. Farmers used the time to check on animals. Smiths, too obsessed with a project to wait until daylight, would hammer softly by the hearth. Lovers might sneak out for secret meetings. Children might roll over and mutter about glowing wolves made of fog. You choose not to investigate that last one too closely, you lie back down, chewing the last of your herring. The fire's glow has softened, warm and low. Around you, others are shifting again. The rhythm of second sleep begins to pull them in, heavier, quieter, deeper. A kind of surrender. As if the first sleep was just the surface, and now you're sinking into the undercurrent. You feel it too. That slipping sensation. Limbs loosening. Eyes heavy. The goat snores somewhere nearby. The wind hushes outside. That strange pocket of wakefulness begins to close, you let out a slow breath and settle again, pulled downward into the deeper well of the night. No clocks. No alarms. Just the fire's dying glow, a belly full of dried fish, and the whisper of old dreams gathering in the corners of your mind. You're awake again, barely, but something feels different this time. Heavier. Pressed against your ribs, just beneath the fur covers, is something cold and unyielding. Not a stone. Not a stick. It's the head of your axe. And you remember, with a quiet sigh, that you tucked it in beside you before falling asleep. You shift slightly, adjusting the haft so it doesn't jab your hip. The cold metal nestles against your side like an awkward, loyal pet. Yes, Vikings slept with their weapons. Not all the time, but often enough for it to be completely normal. Swords under beds, axes beneath blankets, spears leaning just an arm's reach from the bedding. Especially for warriors or those living in raiding zones. Sleeping armed wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. You lie there now, one hand draped over the smooth wooden shaft of your weapon, thumb absent-mindedly rubbing a dent in the iron. It's a familiar weight, a kind of reassurance. Like a child sleeping with a teddy bear, only this one can split a skull. Historians still argue whether weapon sleeping was daily practice or more of a wartime habit. Some evidence suggests that in more peaceful villages, people stored their arms at the foot of the bed or in a communal rack near the door. But in coastal settlements or newly conquered lands, it was far more likely that everyone kept their blades close. Trust was relative, and it wasn't just about being ready to fight. Weapons were personal. Named. Cherished. In Viking society, a warrior's weapon was part of their identity. It wasn't just a tool, it was almost an extension of their soul. You didn't leave it lying around like a dirty sock. You kept it close, especially while vulnerable in sleep. There's even a fringe theory among folklore scholars: sleeping with your axe or sword helped maintain a connection with your ancestors. It was said that dreams shared with your blade could bring visions, omens of battle, signs from the gods, or glimpses of your fate in Valhalla. Whether that's true or just something someone said after too much mead, well. The axe still stays. Tonight, it's not just the axe. You glance around and spot a spear half covered by a fur pelt near the hearth. Across the room, a wooden shield leans against a wall. It's painted with curling patterns of red and black, a family emblem or perhaps just someone's idea of style. A dagger glints near an old man's hip. He's snoring, but his fingers are still curled loosely around the hilt. This wasn't a society that valued vulnerability. Even in dreams, Vikings clung to readiness. For invaders. For beasts. For the unpredictable insults of nature. A weapon in hand meant you could wake and rise without delay. It also meant that, should you die in your sleep, you'd meet the gods armed. You shiver slightly at that thought. It's comforting and grim at the same time. Of course, there were downsides. Rolling over onto a blade edge. Not ideal. People occasionally cut themselves fumbling with weapons in the dark. There are sagas with lines like he awoke bleeding, for the axe had not slept as soundly. Poetry, sure, but also a cautionary tale. Some warriors made scabbards or padded sheaths specifically for nighttime carry. Others simply wrapped their blades in cloth before sleep. The truly careful propped them within arm's reach rather than snuggling them like metallic security blankets. You move the axe slightly now, tucking it between your knees instead of under your ribs. Better. The cold iron smells faintly of salt, leather, and soot. You can almost hear it whispering to you, not in words, but in memory. A clash here. A narrow escape there. You've had it for years. You'll likely die with it. And in your half-sleeping mind, the axe becomes something more. It's a talisman. A symbol of your place in this hard, cold world. You weren't born into safety, you carved it. And in sleep, just like in waking, that edge beside you reminds you who you are. Not everyone had such luxuries. Some poorer families shared weapons, rotating who got to sleep with the household blade. Others relied on clubs or sharpened farming tools. And still, they slept clutching them tightly. Because even if you weren't a warrior by trade, in Viking life, danger never sent a warning. You roll over now, careful not to elbow the goat again, and tuck the axe under your arm. The fire has dimmed, shadows thickening across the ceiling. You hear the distant call of an owl outside. Someone coughs. The longhouse shifts in its dreams. You stare up at the beams above, worn smooth by time, and let your thoughts drift. Maybe tonight you'll dream of battles past. Maybe you'll just dream of warmth, and a world where sleeping without a blade feels safe. Either way, you're ready. You've finally gotten used to the weight of the axe when something new begins to bother you, your neck. It's bent at a weird angle. Again. You shift slightly, trying to find the right position, but there's really no winning here. Your pillow, if it can even be called that, is a cloth sack stuffed with straw. It crackles when you move and pokes in all the wrong places. You punch it once, not angrily, just hopefully. It puffs dust into your face. You cough softly and sink back. Vikings didn't exactly prioritize ergonomic sleep. If you had wealth, status, or extremely good timing, you might score a feather pillow stuffed with eiderdown, prized for its softness and warmth. But the average sleeper in a Norse longhouse settled for more humble options, sacks filled with hay, moss, or scraps of wool. Some didn't use pillows at all, choosing instead to rest their heads on folded cloaks, rolled-up tunics, or even a helmet, though that last one is an acquired taste. The wooden headrest was another popular option. More like a miniature bench than a cushion, it lifted the head slightly off the ground while offering the same give and softness as, say, a rock. Sleep historians, yes, they exist, still debate the purpose of these objects. Were they truly meant for rest? Or were they status symbols? Display items? Makeshift seats? No one agrees. What's certain is they look profoundly uncomfortable, and you're not about to ask for one. You shift again. The straw makes another rustling protest. And something sharp jabs your ear. A barley husk. Classic. You flick it out and sigh. The dog at your feet groans as if to say, just pick a position already. One slightly fun detail, in some households, headrests were perfumed. Well, perfumed is generous. Vikings occasionally placed dried herbs, lavender, thyme, or yarrow, into their sleep sacks. It masked the ever-present scent of damp wool and barnyard funk. It also, supposedly, kept insects away. Whether it worked or not is questionable. But it made sleeping feel ever so slightly like a ritual rather than survival, and there's something else. Vikings had a curious superstition about how you placed your head while you slept. North-facing was thought to bring dreams of wisdom or prophecy. East-facing might invite messages from the gods. But sleeping with your head toward the west, that was considered dangerous. West was the direction of the dead. Face that way, and you might find yourself dreaming of ancestors. Or being beckoned to join them. You quickly realize your pillow is aimed due west. Great, you turn it sideways. North. That's better. Odin likes north. Probably, this kind of orientation mattered a great deal in Norse cosmology. The world was mapped not just geographically but spiritually. Each direction carried weight. Each sleeping posture invited or deflected energy. You weren't just closing your eyes, you were aligning your body with the invisible lines that threaded through the 9 realms. It's not just where you laid your head, either. The position of your arms, the placement of your legs. It all mattered to some. Warriors often slept in a semi-curled pose, one hand resting near their weapon, the other near the heart. Mothers slept wrapped protectively around infants, creating a wall of limbs against the cold. Elders sometimes slept upright, propped against bundles of hay or wooden posts, claiming it eased their breathing. Or maybe they just liked keeping watch over the rest of you. Historians still argue whether these sleeping arrangements followed rigid cultural customs or if it was all just improvisation based on what was least awful. Some saga texts describe detailed sleeping arrangements, almost like ceremonial placements. Others suggest pure chaos. People collapsed wherever they could find room. You start to drift again, face now turned north, straw digging into your cheek, the fires glow a dull smear across your eyelids. But your mind, as always, wanders. You wonder about kings. Did they have soft pillows? Probably. Kings had everything. Silk from Byzantium. Linen from Ireland. Pillows embroidered with gold thread and stuffed with swan feathers and pride. You, however, have a half-crushed goose feather and a questionable smell. But there's comfort in knowing the ground feels the same under all of you. That no matter how fancy the bedding, the night remains long, and the fire burns just as slow. A small child whimpers across the room. A mother's voice murmurs back, soothing. You hear rustling as someone tucks the little one in tighter. Their pillow, if any, is likely a hand-me-down sack softened by years of dreams. Maybe filled with lamb's wool from a sheep long eaten. Everything in a Viking home had history. Even the thing you laid your head upon, your straw sack shifts again, and this time, it finds a tolerable shape. You exhale. Your shoulders settle. The itching wool of your blanket doesn't seem quite so annoying anymore. The goat hasn't stepped on you in hours. Progress, and though your pillow is more thistle than cloud, it cradles you just enough to drift. Enough to carry you back into that weightless space between the wakeful cold and the deep, twitching world of Viking sleep. Your breathing slows. The fire crackles faintly. But something else stirs now, something in your mind. The dreams are starting. You don't remember falling asleep, not exactly. One moment you were adjusting your straw pillow, muttering to yourself about itchy wool and ghost goats. The next, you're somewhere else. Not quite in the longhouse anymore. You're standing on the prow of a ship made of clouds, the sky rippling with northern lights above you. A raven flies overhead, calling your name, not the one your neighbors know, but something older, stranger, like a word carved in stone. Dreams meant something to the Vikings. They weren't just nonsense or scattered thoughts. They were messages. Warnings. Portents. Maybe even prophecies. In a world full of gods, monsters, and mysterious forces, your dreams were the midnight mail, delivered straight from the spiritual realms, postage paid by your subconscious, and not just any gods dropped by in your sleep. The dream world belonged especially to Odin, the All-Father, who was said to travel by thought and dream more than by foot. Odin didn't need a ship, he had ravens. He didn't need a bed, he rode your dreams like a silent storm. And sometimes, just sometimes, he left you with something. A riddle. A face you'd never seen. A sense of dread that wouldn't leave come daylight. You turn under your furs now, half awake but still in that foggy space where reality and dreams start to braid together. You remember what you saw. A wolf with two shadows. A tree bleeding gold. A woman with one eye and a crown of ice, whispering about storms. None of it makes sense. All of it matters. Historians still debate how literally Viking people took their dreams. Some say dreams were just storytelling tools, something to spice up the sagas. Others argue they were woven into daily life. A dream of falling might prompt a fishing trip to be cancelled. A dream of blood could mean a feast, or a funeral. Interpretations varied widely, depending on the dreamer, the setting, and, let's be honest, how much ale was involved, but for those who took dreams seriously, there were interpreters, dream readers, usually women, sometimes trained vulvas or seeresses. These women were believed to walk between worlds even when awake. In dreams, they listened for things others couldn't hear. They didn't just tell you what your dream meant. They told you what it wanted. You might visit one in the morning, whisper your vision, and wait as she stirred ash into water or laid out carved bone tokens, her lips moving in silence. You'd watch her face carefully. If her eyes narrowed, if her fingers clenched, you might be sleeping with one eye open for the rest of the month. Some dreams weren't sent by gods, but by the dead. Ancestors. Restless spirits. Your great-grandfather who never found peace. The child lost at sea. The old warrior buried with no sword. Vikings believed the boundary between living and dead could be crossed, not easily, but not impossibly either. Dreams were the bridge. And every time you closed your eyes, you risked finding someone waiting on the other side. You shiver slightly, despite the furs. Not from cold this time, but from the weight of it all. Of course, not all dreams were heavy. Some were just weird. Take, for example, the famous saga of Gudrun, who dreamed of wearing a red cloak that turned into a stream of blood, then turned into a bear, then bit her hand off. What did it mean? Betrayal, naturally. Or indigestion. You never really knew. Dreams always walked that line. And then there were shapeshifters, creatures who slipped into dreams not as symbols, but as invaders. Foxes. Wolves. Even bears. They came with eyes too human, speech too clear. If you dreamed of one standing at your door, it wasn't just your imagination. It was a warning. You shift again. Your heart beats a little faster now. The dream's fading. The ship of clouds is gone. The woman with the ice crown is silent. But you still feel her presence, like a cold fingerprint on the inside of your skull. You stare up at the beams of the longhouse, now half lit by embers. The night is quieter. Some of your neighbors are snoring again. A dog twitches in its sleep. You wonder what dogs dream about. Chasing deer. Sleeping in a longhouse without chickens, then comes a quiet sob. Someone, a child, is having a bad dream. A parent murmurs comfort, rubbing their back. Another reminder, not all dreams are visions. Some are just memories trying to escape. And in a house full of 30 people, dreams aren't always private. You hear them. Feel them. Share them, whether you want to or not. In some houses, protective charms were tied above the beds. Small Thor's hammers. Carved runes for peace. Bundles of herbs. Not to bring sweet dreams, but to keep the bad ones away. You glance up. There's a piece of driftwood above your head, carved with symbols. You don't know who placed it there. But you're grateful, you close your eyes again. Maybe Odin will return. Maybe not. Maybe tonight is just about drifting through fragments of light and shadow, faces you half remember, words you never learned but somehow understand. You fall again. Deeper this time. Into a dreamless sleep, or perhaps one so vast you'll only remember the echo. You're jostled awake by motion, not rough, but rhythmic. Back and forth. Back and forth. For a heartbeat, you think you're still dreaming. But no. The wooden bench under you creaks. A rope groans. There's salt on the wind, and you realize, you're not in the longhouse anymore, you're aboard a ship. Sleeping at sea was a whole different beast. Longships weren't built with comfort in mind. They were sleek, shallow, and fast, but also exposed. No cabins. No hammocks. Just a row of benches, open air, and whatever covering you managed to scrounge together from your cloak, your shield, or a reluctant sail, you sit up slowly, spine protesting. Beneath you, the ship rocks gently, cutting through the dark waves. Stars wheel above. Someone snores softly near the bow, wrapped in a fur that used to be part of a bear. Another warrior murmurs in sleep, one hand still clutching a spear. There's no fire here, no hearth to warm your feet. Just wind and brine and the steady rhythm of oars. Sleep comes in slices, if it comes at all. Historians still argue whether Viking raiders slept on the deck during longer voyages or camped on land each night. There's evidence for both. Some sagas mention night watches and rotating sleep shifts, suggesting they dozed aboard when necessary. Others describe makeshift tents on shore, with sentries and guarded fires. But when the sea was calm and land was far, they made do with what they had. Cloaks, shields, and body heat, you lie back now, using your coiled rope as a pillow. The wood beneath you is slick with dew. A gull cries somewhere above. The stars feel closer here. Sharper. It's quieter than the longhouse, but somehow lonelier too, and when it wasn't the sea. Vikings had another place to snatch rest, the battlefield. Not during the heat of it, obviously. But in the long stretches before dawn raids, after marches, or when weather pinned a party down, sleep came when and where it could. Under trees. Beside shields. Inside hastily dug pits. No routine. No ceremony. Just exhaustion winning over alertness. You imagine it now. A rain-soaked hill. Mud under your hip. Your cloak pulled over your head. Around you, others rest too, faces smudged with dirt, boots off, weapons still within arm's reach. Every crack of a twig makes you twitch. But you still sleep. Because you have to. Some sagas tell of warriors sleeping with their backs pressed together for warmth. A knot of bodies, wrapped in fur and chainmail. Breathing in tandem. It sounds poetic, until you realize one of them definitely smells like fermented herring and unwashed socks. Still, when you fought through wind, blood, and bone-chilling cold, you take what comfort you can get. You remember one tale in particular, a man so sleep-deprived he dreamed mid-battle. Eyes open, axe swinging, but mind far away, standing on a frozen shore, watching his wife tend a hearth. The saga says he died smiling. Whether that's tragic or peaceful. Well, that depends on the reader. You shift now on the ship's deck. The creaking wood, the scent of tar and seawater, the faint spray on your cheek, it all feels too vivid for dreams. A crewman coughs. Another whispers a prayer to Njord, god of the sea, asking for calm waters and quiet dreams. You whisper it too, just in case. Sometimes, when longships anchored in foreign lands, the crew would disembark in shifts. Half sleeping, half watching. On shore, they'd make lean-tos with their shields and oars, wedge their boots under their heads, and let their armor rest. Vikings weren't fussy. If the ground was dry and the sky didn't look angry, that was a 5-star hotel. You wonder what it felt like to wake in a place you might conquer the next day. To sleep in a stranger's land, knowing your dreams might end in fire and ash. And yet, they still dreamed. Still wrapped themselves in memories and hopes and the endless ocean hum, even if just for a few hours, and when the sea was stormy. Forget it. Sleep vanished. Instead, men took turns bailing water, holding ropes, yelling over the wind. You clung to your seat and prayed to any god that would listen. Sleep was a luxury saved for calm tides and merciful skies. Tonight, though, the water is still. You close your eyes again, letting the motion of the waves rock you. It's not soft, but it's steady. The stars blur above you. Your breath slows, and in this moment, between worlds, between shores, you rest. A Viking at sea, dreaming of firelight, goats, and straw pillows that don't jab you in the ear. You're back on land now. Or at least, back in the longhouse. And you're awake, but only because someone's snoring directly into your ear. It's an impressive snore, too. Starts low, climbs like a distant storm, then breaks into a full, rattling wheeze. You open one eye. It's the blacksmith's son. Of course it is. His mouth is wide open. A string of drool glistens in the moonlight. You sigh deeply. Viking sleep wasn't quiet. Not even close. Sleeping communally meant every sound was shared. Snoring, shifting, muttering, scratching, chewing, midnight snacks, remember, the occasional whispered prayer or fart, all woven into the ambient soundtrack of the night. There was no your space and my space. There was just the space, and everyone lived, and slept, inside it. You shift onto your back, staring up at the rafters. The beams above hold ropes, baskets, herbs, tools. Someone once tried to hang a dried fish up there to cure. It fell on the carpenter's head in the middle of the night. He hasn't let it go since. A baby lets out a short wail. A mother rises, crooning gently. The wail dies down. Then someone on the other side of the room coughs violently for 10 seconds straight. Just as that ends, a sheep in the corner lets out a bleat that sounds almost judgmental. You pull the fur higher over your ears. It doesn't help. Historians still argue over how these communal sleep settings affected mental health. Some believe the closeness built stronger social bonds. Others point out the total lack of privacy, increased stress, and general impossibility of rest as clear downsides. In truth, it was probably both. You felt secure knowing everyone was nearby, but sometimes you just wanted to sleep without being elbowed or sneezed on. In wealthier households, sleeping spaces were sometimes separated by wooden partitions or thick tapestries. These created the illusion of privacy, even if they did little to muffle sound. For most Vikings, though, it was all open-plan living. One big room. One shared air supply. One long, snoring, coughing, dreaming, sleep-talking symphony. You think of the sagas again. They speak of warriors who shared beds on long journeys, huddling against the cold, waking together at dawn. Of married couples murmuring secrets in the dark. Of old women who whispered advice to the younger ones while half asleep. And sometimes, of the cranky uncle who was asked to sleep outside just for one night because of his particularly aggressive snoring. There's even mention of competitions. Yes, snore-offs. Not official, of course, but among restless children and bored teens, there were always games. Who can guess the snore? Who can mimic it best? Who can stuff the most straw into Uncle Bjarne's nose before he wakes up? Tonight, you don't join the game. You're too tired. But you smile at the memory of one winter where someone managed to harmonize 3 different snores into a tune that vaguely resembled a battle march. It was oddly inspiring, and it wasn't just the noise. The movement mattered too. 30 people rolling over, scratching, adjusting, whispering. You were always half aware. Always listening. always dancing at the edge of sleep. Some Viking parents developed remarkable instincts. A mother might rise the moment her child whimpered, even if they were buried under two other sleepers and a medium-sized pig. Fathers learned to sleep with one eye open, literally, if they lived near raider routes. Even pets got used to it, dogs shifting with their humans, goats flopping down beside whoever kept the most body heat. There's a kind of intimacy in it all. Even in the irritation. These were the sounds of life. Of survival. Of everyone being present, in their strange, loud, smelly, chaotic way. You think of it like waves crashing on a shore. Annoying, yes, but also steady. Predictable. Human, you try to focus on something else now. The fire's embers. The creaking beams. The soft clink of someone's necklace as they roll over. It becomes a rhythm. A lullaby of Viking domestic life. You finally begin to drift again. The blacksmith's son is now snoring into a different direction, thank the gods, and the baby has quieted. Even the sheep seems content, the room breathes around you. One inhale. One exhale. In perfect, cacophonous harmony. You wake, not from noise this time, but from something softer. Stranger. Above you, the ceiling glows faintly green and violet. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. There it is again, curling across the open hole in the roof, a ribbon of shifting light that dances across the sky like a spirit unfurling its wings, the northern lights. Aurora borealis, you've seen them before, but never quite like this. Tonight they seem closer. Brighter. Almost sentient. You lie back again, pulling your fur up to your chin, and just watch them flicker. The longhouse is quiet. For once, sleeping beneath the northern lights was a uniquely Viking privilege. Not every settlement was far enough north to witness them. But for those who lived in the reaches of Norway or Iceland, these otherworldly illuminations were just part of the seasonal rhythm. A regular visitor. A silent god, many believed the auroras were connected to the gods. That they were reflections of Valkyries riding across the sky, their armor shimmering with light as they carried warriors to Valhalla. Some thought the lights were the breath of ancestors. Others said it was the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, glimpsed from below. You prefer the Valkyrie story. It makes you feel like the sky is watching over you. Like the light is protective. Fierce. Unstoppable, you pull your blanket tighter, letting the colors reflect on the inside of your closed eyes. It feels like sleeping beneath a spell. In these high latitudes, the sky never fully turns black in summer. Sometimes it just hovers in deep blue twilight, suspended in a half-light that blurs day and night. People adapted. They learned to rest in brightness, to trust tiredness more than darkness. And in winter, when the sun barely rose at all, they slept longer. Or at least tried to. Historians still debate how well Vikings actually slept during these long seasonal extremes. Did they hibernate during the deepest part of winter? Did they suffer from sleeplessness in the endless summer glow? Written sources are vague, and bones don't tell you who was tired. But oral tradition suggests a flexible approach. Sleep when you can. Wake when you must. Tonight, it feels like you could sleep forever under this sky, but there were challenges, too. Without heavy shutters, the light could sneak in through cracks and openings. You remember one summer when a boy in the village insisted the sky was whispering to him all night. That the lights had eyes. That he saw faces in the green flames. Nobody took him too seriously. But that's the thing about the Viking world, nothing was completely unbelievable. Some households hung extra layers of wool over their doorways during aurora season. Not to block the light, necessarily, but because they feared it could lure dreams out of their heads. There was a tale of a woman who dreamed so vividly under the auroras that she never fully woke again. She just drifted. Talking in riddles. Smiling at nothing. you don't believe that. But still. You pull your blanket a little tighter, your feet are cold again. You wiggle your toes, trying to nestle them against the still warm spot where the dog was sleeping earlier. The embers pop softly. The light outside flickers, shifting now from green to pale pink. Not everyone sleeps inside on nights like this. Some brave, or foolish, souls choose to lie outside under the open sky, wrapped in fur cloaks and thick socks, watching the stars until sleep takes them. You did it once. Froze your nose. Didn't regret it. There's something about this quiet that feels different. No goats snoring. No babies crying. Just the low breath of the house, the crackling of embers, and the hiss of wind curling around the turf roof. You can see why people told stories about this light. It's too strange to be just weather. Too beautiful to be ignored. And too unpredictable to be explained. A fringe belief among the old-timers held that if you dreamt under the auroras, your soul traveled farther. That you could slip between realms. See the gods. Speak with lost lovers. Or walk the halls of Valhalla and wake with a piece of it still clutched in your hand. You don't expect any of that tonight. You just want rest, but the sky dances on. And your eyes flutter shut again. The lights pulse behind your lids. Dreams stir. The longhouse holds its breath. And you drift, slowly, into the kind of sleep that feels like floating. You awaken to the soft hum of a melody. At first, you think it's part of a dream, one of those lingering echoes that drifts through half-sleep. But then you hear the words, low and sweet, almost too gentle for this rough longhouse. A lullaby. Sung in the old tongue, you roll slightly toward the sound. A mother, sitting near the hearth, rocks a child swaddled in thick wool. Her voice weaves a tune about the sea, about a boy who wandered into the waves and came back with silver in his eyes. It's beautiful. And just a little terrifying. That's the Viking lullaby tradition in a nutshell. Sleep songs weren't just about soothing children to sleep. They were stories, warning tales, prayers. And sometimes veiled lessons about how harsh the world could be. In a culture that faced war, storms, hunger, and disease as part of daily life, bedtime wasn't spared the realism. You remember when your grandmother sang, "Lay down, little crow, keep your eyes from the sky, or the trolls will reach down and steal your cry." Comforting, right? Others mentioned sea serpents, hags, and wandering spirits who came for naughty children. These weren't Disney endings, they were survival tools. Wrapped in music, historians still argue whether these darker lullabies were meant to frighten children into obedience or simply reflect the everyday threats of Norse life. Likely both. The Vikings didn't believe in sugarcoating. Even bedtime was a place to pass down warnings, but not all lullabies were grim. Some praised gods, Freyr for bountiful sleep, Frigg for protection. Some spoke of animals curling into dens or boats gliding across still fjords. The kind of imagery that settles you down. That pulls your breath into a slower rhythm. You listen now as the melody winds down. The mother hums the final few bars, kissing her child's forehead before wrapping them tighter in a goatskin blanket. The fire crackles quietly. You can hear the child's breathing ease. And just for a moment, the whole room feels held. Like the song is a thread tying everyone together. Not all children slept easily, of course. Some thrashed and wailed, and the longhouse had no shortage of advice. Warm milk with herbs. Runes carved into crib slats. Stories whispered in reverse to trick nightmares out of the mind. You once saw a woman hang a silver coin over her baby's bed, tied to a string soaked in seawater. She said it caught bad dreams like a net. And speaking of dreams, children's dreams were taken seriously. If a child said they saw something in the night, adults listened. Not always with fear, but with respect. Some said young minds were closer to the spirit world. Others believed that ancestors spoke more freely to children, using them as messengers. If a child woke crying and said they saw a man with no face, nobody laughed. They lit a candle. Some families even had sleep watchers, older siblings, or a parent who'd stay half awake to keep an eye on the youngest. Not just for comfort, but for protection. Against spirits. Against fever. Against the ever-creeping cold. You recall a winter when the frost bit harder than usual. One child couldn't sleep without crying. Every night, just after the hearth dimmed, she'd scream about something looking in. A face at the smoke hole. They tried everything, runes, herbs, even moving her bed closer to the center. Nothing worked until an old widow sang to her. The same song every night. Something about snow wolves and red thread. After a week, the girl stopped screaming. No one ever asked what she saw. Viking childhood was fleeting. You were old enough to work by the time you could lift a bucket. Old enough to fight not long after that. But for a few short years, there was song. Fur blankets. Cracked cradles rocked beside the hearth. And lullabies, strange, beautiful lullabies. You close your eyes again, letting the last notes of the mother's song echo in your mind. It's not one you recognize, but it feels familiar. Like it's been passed from voice to voice for 1,000 years. A river of sound running through generations, sleep returns more gently now. No axe beneath you. No straw jabbing your cheek. Just warmth. Just breath. Just song. You stir slightly, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and faint herbs. But tonight, before sleep fully takes you, you reach under your tunic and feel for the small shape tied around your neck. A charm. Cool to the touch. Rough edges, worn smooth from years of handling. You clutch it briefly, then release it to rest against your chest again. It's a Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. Not the massive kind used to smash giants, but a miniature one, carved from bone or soft iron, suspended on a leather cord. It's your sleep protection. Your nighttime insurance policy. You're not alone in this habit. All around you, tucked beneath blankets, sewn into tunics, or strung up above the rafters, are small symbols, talismans against the night. In Viking culture, bedtime wasn't just about physical rest, it was a moment of vulnerability. A time when the soul was believed to roam. To dream, to drift, maybe even to leave the body for a while. And so people took precautions. Historians still argue over how widespread these sleep rituals were. Were they tied more to paganism, to local superstition, or just to personal comfort? Some evidence is carved in stone, some passed down in sagas. Much of it lived in whispers, handed from mother to daughter, friend to friend. You remember the rituals clearly. Before bed, some would draw runes on the hearthstone with charcoal, tracing peace, strength, or protection. Others laid small bundles of herbs, thyme, mugwort, juniper, under their pillows. Not just for scent, but for their supposed spiritual weight. Mugwort, especially, was the dream herb. Said to bring visions. Said to keep away the dead. You glance across the room. Above a child's sleeping form, you spot a tiny Thor's hammer tied to a beam with red thread. Another sleeper clutches what looks like a cloth pouch, perhaps filled with blessed soil, or ash from a sacred fire. There were prayers too. Not long, formal things, just murmured words to Freya, Frigg, or even Odin. Some begged for peaceful sleep. Others for meaningful dreams. And some, especially in times of fear, just asked to wake up again in the morning, and if something went wrong, if sleep was broken by shadowy visions, or nights were filled with panicked gasps, there were cures. Charms could be rebelist. Beds could be moved. Even the doorway might be resmudged with soot or salt to cleanse it. One old tale you remember involves a woman whose dreams were so plagued by snake-like spirits that she moved her bed to a different part of the longhouse, facing east, closer to the hearth. She wove 3 feathers from a raven into her hair. And after that, the dreams stopped. Whether it was the bed or the feathers, no one knows. But people still talk about it. Some wore iron rings to sleep. Not decorative, protective. Iron was believed to repel evil. Others placed blades under their mattresses, even if they didn't expect to fight. Just the cold, glinting presence of steel was thought to ward off ill spirits. You now adjust your own position, careful not to tangle the leather cord. The hammer swings slightly, taps your collarbone once. That small thud is comforting. Like a knock on a door you've already locked, you think of those who believed that dreams could be stolen. That witches, real or imagined, could enter homes as mist and feed on a dreamer's breath. To stop them, some sprinkled rye around their beds, a kind of dream moat. Others left a bowl of water near the door, to catch a spirit before it got in. Quirky? Maybe. But when the world outside your longhouse was filled with wolves, rival clans, and the occasional storm spirit, you did what you could. Not all charms were spiritual. Some were memory anchors. A comb from a dead mother. A piece of carved bone from a childhood pet. Items placed near the bed to ensure you dreamed of safe things. Or at least familiar ones. Tonight, you don't whisper a prayer. You don't need to. The room is quiet. The charm is cool against your skin. The fire's glow dances across the beams. Your body is tired, but your spirit is calm, and when you finally drift, you do so with the quiet knowledge that even here, in the middle of a longhouse full of breathing, dreaming, twitching sleepers, you've staked your little claim. Drawn your line in the night. Marked your place in the dark. It's hard to tell how long you've been asleep, or even if you really woke up just now. Time bends strangely in the heart of winter. There's no sun to greet you, just a faint bluish haze slipping in through the roof hole, like morning gave up halfway through arriving. You stretch under the covers, your joints cracking like old wood. The longhouse is still quiet, muffled in a deep hush. In the winter months, everything changes. Sleep stretches longer. Meals grow heavier. People move slower. The cold is no longer something outside, it becomes part of the air inside your chest, in your bones. You're not just sleeping through winter. You're surviving it. The darkness lingers for weeks. Some nights feel like they last 2, maybe 3 days. And so, sleep shifts. Some people seem to nap endlessly, curling up for 10 or 12 hours at a time. Others find themselves restless. Awake at odd intervals. Dazed. Alert. Back asleep. There's no pattern. Just rhythm. Like waves that don't bother counting anymore, historians still debate what Viking winter sleep looked like. Some suggest a kind of semi-hibernation, long, slow nights of deep rest, with entire households nodding off early and waking late. Others point to sagas where people stayed up weaving, storytelling, or sharpening blades by firelight until well past midnight. There's probably truth in both. Tonight, you feel the winter weight. Your body just wants to stay still, warm, hidden beneath layers of fur and wool. Your toes twitch. You bury them deeper. The dog has snuck back under your blanket, a compact source of heat pressed against your shins. You don't mind, but you remember last year, when the dark got too long. When sleep stopped being rest and started becoming a kind of fog. You'd wake still tired. Dream too much. Feel heavy even in daylight. You weren't alone. The elder said it was the long night sickness. A sluggishness of the mind that came when days vanished and cold took over the will. People had remedies for that, too. Not medicine, movement. You'd be dragged out of bed, made to walk to the edge of the fjord, breathe sharp air, splash your face with freezing water. Some swore by goat milk mixed with crushed roots. Others claimed that just standing barefoot on stone for 5 minutes could reset the blood. You weren't convinced. But you did it anyway. Even the gods weren't immune to winter's lull. Myth tells of Baldur, the beautiful, sleeping deeply through the dark months. Of the sun being swallowed, hidden behind the mountains, and the world wrapped in Scotty's cold cloak. No wonder people whispered that winter was alive, that it watched. That if you slept too long, it might forget to let you wake up. Tonight, though, the winter quiet feels gentle. You don't fear the dark. It feels like a giant hand cupped over the longhouse, keeping it still. Protecting it. Preserving it. You shift slightly and listen. The others are still asleep. Someone murmurs in a dream. A soft clunk as a log settles in the hearth. The baby whimpers, but doesn't wake. Outside, the wind doesn't howl. It whispers. Like it's lost something it can't quite remember. The winter sleep makes you dream more. Strange, deep dreams that leave you half lost when you wake. You once dreamed you lived inside a mountain and had roots instead of legs. Another time, you dreamed of the sea. But the water was made of black feathers. You never understood those. You never tried to. Some people kept dream journals, pieces of hide scratched with symbols to remember what they saw. Others believed winter dreams were gifts from the Norns, the three sisters who wove fate. They were easier to hear in the silence, they said. But only if you listened. You pull your furs tighter. You don't want to wake fully. Not yet. There's no point. No sun. No task urgent enough to draw you out from this warmth. Even the goats aren't stirring yet. That's how you know it's not time. In the deepest winters, the longhouse became a kind of cocoon. People moved from fire to bed and back again. The line between waking and sleeping thinned. Days blurred. The rhythm became internal. A pulse you carried together, and in those moments, wrapped in fur, lulled by breath and fire, half dreaming of gods and roots and black-feathered seas, you understood something very old. That sleep wasn't an escape. It was a season. Just like snow. Just like dark, and tonight, that season still has its hold on you. The fire is nearly out now. What once roared with orange light and loud crackling has faded into a faint, flickering glow. Only a handful of glowing coals remain, nestled deep within the ash, glowing like the eyes of an old watchman growing drowsy after a long, silent night. They pulse gently, a slow rhythm of light that offers no heat to the edges of the longhouse but hums quietly in the heart of it. Each ember seems to breathe, as though the fire itself is trying to lull the room into sleep just a little longer. Their soft light casts long, strange shadows across the rough timber walls, making the carved beams and hanging tools appear like frozen figures in a silent play. As the fire dims, so does the contrast between light and dark. The longhouse is wrapped in a pale hush. The outlines of the world soften. You lie still beneath your furs, body heavy, mind barely awake. There is no urgency in your limbs. No cry or clang to pull you upright. You can feel something changing just beyond the thick wooden walls. A subtle shift. Morning presses lightly at the edge of the world, not with brightness or brilliance, but with a quiet, gradual weight. The air feels slightly different. The quality of the light, not light exactly, but a dim, colorless glow, has begun to rise. It is the in-between hour. The space between night and day. Not quite either. A pause. A breath. You do not rise. Not yet. There is no need. You remain where you are, tucked in your layered cocoon of wool and fur, staring upward at the darkened ceiling. Your eyes trace the outline of the beams. You count the knots in the wood. The silence around you is complete but not empty. It is full of the breathing of others. Full of warmth and closeness. You feel yourself drifting again, not away from sleep, but into it, even as you hover in this liminal space. And as your thoughts drift further from what the morning might bring, they turn instead towards something deeper. Something older. You find your mind sliding not toward what comes next, but what comes last, because in the world you know, sleep is not just a nightly ritual. It is more than a biological need. More than a break from toil. It is a kind of ritual. A quiet preparation. A practice for something larger, a practice for the final rest. There is a saying that has always existed in your village. Whispered in dark corners. Told to children when they first begin to ask questions about death. You sleep like you die, and die like you sleep. The words are not meant to scare, only to prepare. They do not make sleep easier, but they give it meaning. And in a culture shaped by wind, storm, steel, and fate, meaning is everything. The Vikings never thought of death as a closing. Not a curtain falling. Not an end. They saw it as a journey. A crossing over into a new place. A realm that lived just beyond the veil of what you could see or touch. A great hall beyond the wind. A field of golden light. A hall of thunder and joy. And just as every long voyage required careful planning, so too did this one. Each night, when you lay down, it was with a kind of readiness. You wrapped yourself in your heaviest furs, the same way your body might one day be wrapped for burial. You kept your most sacred charms close to your chest. Not because you were afraid, but because you believed the soul might slip free and wander while the body slept. You kept your weapon near your hand. Not out of fear, but because valor must be present at all times, even in dreams. A warrior without a weapon was like a ship without a sail. Even at rest, you were not careless. Your fingers move now, almost involuntarily. They slide along the edge of your blanket and brush the haft of your axe. It is there. Solid. Smooth from use. Worn but loyal. Your hand lingers for a moment, curled lightly around the grip. The axe rests beside you like an old friend. It says nothing. It does not glow or hum. But it waits. Historians have often noted how Viking burials echo the softness and familiarity of sleep. The dead are laid out gently. They are dressed not in robes, but in the clothes they wore while living. They are placed on beds of straw or animal skin. Surrounding them are the small objects that made up the pattern of their lives. A favorite blade. A spoon. A brooch. A comb. In the case of warriors, burials sometimes become ships. A final journey, made in a vessel meant to carry them from this world into the next. They are laid with care, with drinking horns at their side, helmets at their feet, shields curved gently around their heads. Women are buried no less reverently. Keys, tools, tokens of the hearth are arranged with equal meaning. Sometimes even a pillow is included, as though they might awaken soon and prepare breakfast. One theory says this practice was more than symbolic. That sleep and death were truly linked. That the space between them was thinner than most believed. And that if you died gently, well prepared, you might rise again. In Valhalla. Or in Folkvangr. Or in some quiet place where soft light touches your skin and no wolves circle the fire, you have seen burials yourself. Not always grand. Not always carved with runes or placed in ships. But always tender. A grave dug in frozen earth. A stone placed with care. A wooden spoon laid across folded hands. Sometimes nothing more than a carved bead or piece of cloth. The gestures are small. But they speak. They say, we remember. We hope. We send you with love. And sometimes, when you think of your own eventual sleep beneath the earth, you wonder what they might place with you. A blade, perhaps. Or your favorite spoon, the one with the carved handle you keep fixing. Maybe that charm you never take off, even when you bathe. Or maybe nothing at all. Maybe only your dreams. There is a tale of a woman who died with a smile still faint on her lips. Her family said she had dreamed of a great road lit with torches. A wide door. A hall filled with laughter. They say the gods whispered her name and she followed without fear. You do not know if the story is true. But the image remains. Another story tells of a man who refused to sleep for 9 nights. He had seen something in a dream. Something he feared. He tried to outrun it by never closing his eyes. On the 10th night, standing at the edge of a field, he fell asleep on his feet. His axe slipped from his grasp. He never woke. No one can say if he was brave or foolish. But his story is told still. You think of these things without fear. Without sadness. You think of them as part of something larger. Because here, in this world, sleep is not an ending. It is a bridge. A whisper. A quiet conversation held between your breath, your gods, and your ancestors. Every night you lie down is a small ritual. A quiet farewell. And every morning you rise is a gift. One you receive with hands open and eyes still half dreaming. You exhale now, a slow breath, and feel it drift toward the hearth. The last embers sigh back at you, glowing faintly, like they heard something. A goat nearby snorts, suddenly and loudly, as if it has remembered some great and pressing annoyance. You blink once, startled, then smile. The solemn mood breaks for a moment. But you forgive it. It has been a good sleep. The kind of sleep that makes your body heavy and warm. The kind that leaves your mind clear. The kind that lingers behind your ribs even as the day prepares to rise. When you finally rise, when the light breaks fully and seeps through the edges of the door, when footsteps begin to move across the longhouse floor, you will carry this rest with you. It will cling to your skin like a blessing. It will shield your thoughts. It will remind you of the quiet place you came from just before waking, but not yet. Now, you remain still. Axe beside you. Charm resting against your chest. Furs pulled high. The room is quiet again. The fire is almost out, and sleep, that oldest companion, still lingers with you. Holding you steady. Holding you safe. Until the day begins anew. You have almost forgotten that you are awake. That fine line between wakefulness and sleep has grown so thin, so delicate, that it barely exists anymore. Your breathing has slowed, deepened, and settled into a calm, even rhythm that mirrors the stillness of the longhouse. Each inhale moves through your chest like a quiet wave, rising gently, then falling again into silence. Your body, once tense from the cold or from the lingering thoughts of the day, has now begun to let go. Muscles that were coiled and tight begin to soften. Your limbs grow heavy, not from exhaustion, but from ease. The thick, weighty furs that wrap around you cradle your shape with familiar softness, warming you from beneath and above. They press against your skin like memories of safety, of comfort, of being held by something larger than yourself, and yet, even here in this silent cradle of night, something stirs inside you. Not loud or sudden, but subtle. A question, rising like smoke, like a whisper in the deepest chamber of your mind. A thought that refuses to vanish, even in this near sleep. How did they really sleep? How did it work for them? How did people so raw and wild, people shaped by wind and fire and sea, people who chased storms and built ships with dragon heads, people who lived with one hand on a sword and the other on a rope, how did they find rest? How did they close their eyes at the end of a day filled with danger, noise, and fire, and simply let it all go? The question lingers as you lie still, caught between breath and breath, eyes half closed but mind still watching. You see them now, as if they are lying close beside you. You see their hands first, rough and thick-skinned, marked with cuts and calluses from rowing through freezing waters and shaping wood into shields. Hands that fought, built, hunted, held. Hands that pulled ropes tight and gripped axe handles in battle. You see faces, carved by time and weather, creased by the wind that poured off northern waves and the sun that glared down on fields and fjords. Skin made leathery by salt and smoke, eyes sharpened by long days of watching horizons. You imagine the cloaks they wore, heavy with the scent of hearth ash, pine resin, and lingering wood smoke. Not perfume, not anything soft or delicate, but the smell of a life lived outdoors and near fire. The smoke of cooking meat, the sharp tang of iron tools, the warmth of wool that has never quite lost the scent of the animal it came from. These were men and women who braved seas clogged with floating ice, who stood firm through winters that seemed eternal. Who planted crops under skies that barely grew warm, and who loved and mourned and hoped just like anyone else. They carved fierce serpents into the tips of their ships, not just as decoration, but as talismans of power and defiance, as signs that said, "We are not afraid," and still, at the end of all of it, after the battle cries had faded, after the hammers were set down and the oars stopped splashing, they found sleep. Not perfect sleep, perhaps. Not always gentle or deep. But sleep nonetheless. They returned to their longhouses, crawled beneath rough, scratchy blankets stuffed with straw or feathers, and closed their eyes. This idea has long puzzled historians. What we know about Viking sleep is like scattered stones on a frozen path. Difficult to piece together. The stories passed down to us speak of gods and heroes, of wars and voyages, of feasts and funerals. But none spend much time on bedtime. There are no tales filled with pillows, with mattresses, with dreams whispered into the ears of children. Instead, we are left with fragments. A carved bed in a burial mound. A line in an old poem. A rune that almost resembles the word for dream, etched into stone centuries ago. The picture is incomplete, but even the pieces offer something. Some believe that sleep was not a single stretch of darkness, but something split. Two portions of rest, separated by a quiet time of wakefulness in the middle of the night. In that in-between hour, they may have tended fires, spoken to the gods, shared soft words in the dark. Others believe the darkness of northern winters led to long, hibernation-like rest, while the endless light of summer left room for only the briefest sleep, snatched between work and war. There are whispers among scholars that dreams mattered deeply, not just as passing fancies, but as messages from spirits, omens from the divine. Sleep, for them, was never just sleep. It was a threshold. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between all these beliefs. They slept as their world allowed. When the wind was kind and the hearth full of warmth, perhaps they slept deeply. When danger loomed or the sea called again in the morning, perhaps they only rested lightly. They fell asleep by glowing hearths, in the bellies of ships that creaked and swayed, beside the cattle that shared their warmth, and beneath skies jeweled with stars that never blinked. They rested with weapons nearby. Not out of paranoia, but out of custom. They rested with songs in their heads, with the distant voices of skalds and the hush of wind threading through wooden walls. And sometimes, just sometimes, they rested without fear. You shift now, slowly, onto your back. The motion is small but complete. You feel the weight of the furs settle differently against your chest, your arms, your thighs. There is a comfort in that heaviness, a reminder that you are covered, held, protected. Around you, the longhouse is quiet. Still. Deep in its own breathing. A few figures turn slightly in their sleep, the soft rustle of movement breaking the silence for only a moment before dissolving into stillness again. The fire has burned low. In the hearth, a few embers still glow, blinking like tired eyes that have almost closed for good. Smoke has thinned but lingers, floating up into the beams above like a memory, and this precise moment, is not just the end of the night. It is something softer, more elusive. It is a pause. A breath between chapters. The world beyond the longhouse has not yet awakened. It has not demanded your voice, your feet, your hands. No footsteps echo yet. No clatter of pots, no clang of tools, no calling of names. What fills the room instead is breath. Shared breath. The warm, invisible pulse of a dozen bodies resting together. And that, in this instant, is enough. More than enough, you can feel it now. The settling. The quiet after all things have come to rest. The longhouse breathes as one. What was once a dozen rhythms, mismatched and chaotic, has become a single, slow pulse. Even the goat, so often shuffling and muttering in sleep, is still. A tiny miracle. A gift. Your eyes lift. You gaze upward into the dark skeleton of the roof, tracing the beams that stretch like bones across the dim space. Their rough surfaces hold the stories of winters long past. Between them, light begins to bloom. Thin and pale, but present. It slips through cracks like water, like whispers from the coming day. It is the first sign that dreams are ending, that the world is returning. You do not fight it. Instead, you close your eyes again. Slowly. Willingly. You let the drowsiness return, and in that last space before sleep claims you fully, you feel the connection. The quiet thread. You feel the way your breath now mirrors the breath of those who came before you. The ones who slept with axes nearby, with prayers whispered to gods whose names are barely known. The ones who lay in rooms much like this one, who watched the last flickers of firelight and hoped the night would be merciful. You are part of them now. You are one more heartbeat in a history written not in words, but in dreams, one more breath in the hush of the longhouse, and when the world returns, when voices rise and footsteps sound again, when the sun reaches in through the gaps and calls you to rise, you will be ready, but not yet, not now, because now that you sleep, you have made it, dreamer. The longhouse quiets around you, falling into a gentle hush. Even the morning light seems reluctant to press further inside these walls. The furs that surround your body have softened with warmth, your limbs feel distant and heavy with rest, and your breath falls into perfect rhythm with the sleeping world. There is nothing more to do now. No fire needs tending. No blade calls for sharpening. The goat lies still in the corner, calm and silent. The embers in the hearth have dimmed to faint glimmers, barely glowing in the dark, and the ceiling above blurs softly, shifting between shadow and light as the new day approaches. You remember the warmth of the fire, the soft lullabies sung in the night by voices you can almost hear. You recall the flicker of auroras, those glowing ribbons of color dancing like silk across the dark northern sky. You feel again the steady weight of the axe resting close by, the cold air brushing your nostrils, and the coarse scratch of wool against your cheeks. All of these memories begin to dissolve now. Fading into something slower, deeper, and more timeless, the longhouse breathes all around you, a cradle made of ancient beams, curling smoke, and the stories of generations long past, and in this final moment, you let it all go. The noise, the questions, the flickering thoughts that chase each other through your mind. You give them back to the night, to the gods, and to the silence that lies between footsteps. You are safe here, you are still, you are exactly where you are meant to be, so sleep now, quietly, deeply, without any worry, let the snow fall where it may. Let the northern wind hum its low, steady song outside, let the rafters creak softly above you, and the dreams flow freely around your mind. There is nothing left for you to carry, only this stillness, only this breath, only this sleep.